Righty, I wanted to have a little discussion about a post that I made showing some probably extreme looking elbow extension training. Of course, the shit that looks extreme is always the stuff that, you know, gets sent out into the Instagram ether and has a lot of people who don't understand what's going on shit talking. So I felt like this is a perfect example of something to explain a little bit more and just maybe talk about some of these concepts in general. I'll put a clip of what I was doing on this video, but basically it's, you know, dropping a weight, so it's forcing my elbow into extension, and I had my elbow set up in such a way that I was having to stop it from extending. Like, think about it as something that is almost hyperextending my elbow, but at a level that I can load and tolerate and doesn't cause pain, with the intention of increasing the intensity on that over time. And the reason, there's only one reason that I'm really doing that, and that is because in jiu-jitsu, at my current level of technique, I do get armbarred sometimes, and I want to be able to build up a little more tissue resilience just in case I can't tap early enough. Like, I definitely am an early tapper on arm bars because I like being able to do strength training and not having fucked up elbows that hurt. But sometimes your other arm is stuck in a weird position, you're gritting your teeth, you maybe black out and forget to say tap. There's lots of reasons why your elbow might get yanked on in that position that maybe you don't want it to be yanked on, especially in that end range of extension. And having enough tissue resilience where you can give yourself 1 extra second or 2 extra seconds of being able to sustain that load without getting injured is totally valuable, because that's usually where people are getting injured in jiu-jitsu, is in those last couple seconds of a submission, at least in my limited experience with the people that I roll with. So, you know, years ago, if I saw a video of anybody doing that, having their arm propped up and dropping a kettlebell and having it yank their elbow into extension, I would probably say, what kind of silly shit is this? Because I had never thought about training tissue specifically to meet certain demands based on what you need that tissue to do. Now, fast forward many years later, different experience, different perspective. It's something that I will continue to do, and I will continue to have my clients do at whatever level they are currently at, and based on where they need to get to. But I think it's worth talking about some of the general principles and how I'm trying to progress those. So, you know, if we're looking at an elbow joint, if we want to develop as much extension and flexion ability as possible, having a joint that goes through fundamental motion, which is rotation, just showing that there's enough rotation available to have those bones like not run into each other when we're flexing and extending. That's kind of the starting point. Like, let's build some rotational capacity there, because that's a rotating joint. It's supposed to do those things. Ideally, we build the intensity on that to where that joint can rotate all the way as far as it needs to go, and tolerates loading well there, generates and absorbs force in those end ranges. And then once we get, you know, maybe not once we get to that point, but as we're developing that, we can also start working on some straight arm and bent arm stuff. And some parts of that training would look like regular strength training, where we're doing reps of exercises, pushing and pulling, but there's a shitload more stuff available to us training-wise. And based on those demands that you need that elbow joint to go through, our training shouldn't just be doing reps of an exercise. I mean, unless maybe that's all you need to do is just reps of an exercise. I will make the argument, though, that getting a little buffer zone outside of that is good for everybody, because life happens and there's variables that are not going to be controllable, and you may get your elbow into a position that it hasn't been into a lot and doesn't tolerate load well. That's where injuries happen. So trying to plan for that as best we can and incorporating a little bit of extra training there is super worthwhile. Anyway, so going back to extension. So once I develop some rotational capacity, let's say now my goal is to build up a lot of straight arm resilience in this extended position. Well, one, starting level and easy and controllable, I can passively stretch that just to make sure, let's say maybe my biceps really tight, my elbow doesn't all extend all the way. I can stretch that passively, but I want more than passive flexibility there. So once I get that passive flexibility dialed in, I'm gonna load it with isometrics, or as part of that passive stretching, stretch first, do something like Pails and Rails isometrics, where I'm loading all this lengthened bicep tissue isometrically, increasing intensity on that. I'm also working the shortened side, where I'm trying to extend my elbow really hard by contracting my tricep. That's like not low level, but that's a great place to start because we can adjust the intensity precisely. We can accumulate a lot of time under tension there. Wonderful way to build up that capacity just to be really strong and resist and absorb force in our end ranges, and also help our joint maybe get more extension if we're limited in extension. Once I have built a good base level of isometric loading and I can do that at a high intensity, well, now we need to think about what else is my elbow going to be doing. If I'm getting armbarred, I'm probably going to be resisting that, and my elbow is going to be being forced into extension by some strong person who's making my elbow extend when I don't want it to. That's a lot of eccentric loading. So applying eccentric type loading into that extended position is also going to be really valuable. Thinking about that position, where is my arm going to be when that happens? Arm bars are not usually happening here. They are, but maybe I want to just bias more lengthened tissue here. So getting my arm out into a different position here where I just have a lot more length across this stuff is also going to increase those demands. So I can start working on some eccentric loading out in that angle. And I can increase the intensity on that, where it's still slow, but I'm working on doing that with maybe lots of weight. Maybe that's my end range goal, taking that all the way into extension. It's kind of the next step beyond that isometric loading. After that, then we can introduce velocity. And that's usually where the gnarly shit happens, right? It's like, maybe I get my elbow really strong and I can extend when it's happening at this rate, but what if it's happening like this? Or I get it all the way extended and I'm not tapping because I'm a stubborn bastard, so they really yank on it in that end range. That's fast little bit of extension force there. That's the shit that's super, super demanding on connective tissue. And if you haven't trained that, most likely that tissue is not going to tolerate that level of force well. So that's where something like what I was doing there, where I'm dropping a kettlebell and having it snap my elbow into extension and trying to stop it there. That's the specific goal in mind, is that little bit of extension, getting my elbow yanked in that position. But it took me a long time training to get to that point where that was even appropriate. And for a lot of people who haven't done that, that is not the place to start. And that's why I'm making this long ass video talking about it, because that's hard to say in the caption, or you put it in the caption, maybe it doesn't even get read. Or somebody just sees this and has a knee-jerk reaction. That looks stupid and dangerous. Why would I ever want to do that? Silliness, right? But this is why. And so you can really look at all physical things like this, and that's something that I do for my own training. This is how I think of training other people now, is this concept of joint and tissue specific training. And we follow this model from functional range conditioning, which is just the internal strength model, which is really just thinking about, like, from internal demands, what do all these parts need to be able to do for these physical things? We still want to do those physical things for practice and efficiency, and maybe you like them, they're fun, whatever, but making sure that we're also incorporating specific training to develop those further, or maybe make some catch up to where we need them to be. That's what this shit's all about. So if you watched all this and listened to my rambling, I sincerely appreciate it. Thanks.